I think it was Frances Barton wrote in one of her memoirs that people preferred the sheep in the dry periods because when the sheep ran out of grass, they just stayed quiet, but the cows would make a lot of noise.
Well, Bartons were sheep people to start out with. They were neighbors of ours up there. Frances Barton was a near dear friend of mine over the years, and her and Henry Barton started out, I think they were 5 or 6 miles from the Canadian line, right. Well, if you know where that Duncan place is, it was north of that. And that John and Roger, the two boys they had up there, I think Mrs. Barton probably taught those kids to start out with. And then after they got a little age, well then she came down to Genevieve and I don't know whether they bought that Genevieve store. You go back, as I remember it anyway.
Yeah, I actually have a couple pictures of the boys in front of the store. Came from one of their memoirs.
Well, that store was built as a co-op store, and I think the co-op was out of Saco. Yeah, we were, what was it, 3 miles from, if I wanted to play with any kids, I had to walk up there and play with Roger and John, so.
Do you remember going into the store?
Oh yeah, right, so mighty, yeah, I think when we were going to school at Kiefer's, which was 2 miles east of there, I think we used to always stop at the Barton store part of the time we were on the buggy and part of the time we were saddle horse, but well, she had I don't remember, it was 2 or 3 mail routes that come in there. One out of Saco, one out of Hinsdale, and one out of Teagney. And then they had 2 telephones come in there that weren't hooked together. One out of Hinsdale and one out of Saco. Somebody would, in the Hinsdale area, would want to talk to somebody in Saco. They'd call Mrs. Barton and then she'd have to relay the call for you, so.
Did you guys ever have a telephone?
Well, later years, we didn't have not in the early days we didn't. Some of those old telephones, they run the telephone line on the fence post with an insulator on them. And if the cow or the horse got to rubbing on it, well then you'd probably lose your connection, so. And those old phones, you had a deal on the wall about 1.5 feet square, and it had a speaker on it, and then you had a crank on the side, and when you wanted to call somebody, you could ring a short ring, which was 1 crank, or a long ring, which was 2, and so you had to remember what sequence you had to go through to get a hold of your neighbor, so. And they'd hear that, and then they'd go pick up the receiver, so.
I heard stories that there were a lot of, especially older folks, who just couldn't help the temptation to listen in on all the phone calls.
Oh, yes. That wasn't all early days. Later years, you had the same trouble when they first put the phones in, the modern phone. Well, you'd maybe have 2 or 3 people on the same line. So if one person was on it, you picked it up. Well, if there was somebody else on it, you just waited until they got through, or hoped hope they got through in a way.
So where was your guys' ranch? It was north of Genevieve?
Nope. Well, the home place was 3 miles from Genevieve, south, or north and west.
So it would have been there by that Grandma Road, they call it?
Well, that would have been my granddad Mogan's place over there, and that was, well, I guess that was about 3.5, 4 miles over there. And the folks, early days, that's where they got their mail. The mail come out of Hinsdale, and any personal mail was dropped off at Grandma and Grandpa Mogan's, and then in the wintertime, weather got right, and you needed to read the paper and see what you got for mail, and then you'd go get on your saddle horse and take a gunny sack along and put your mail in a gunny sack and bring it home. So,
So everyone would stop by and visit your grandparents, huh?
well, I'm sure they did. They weren't right on the mail route. They were off about a mile, I guess. So I think Grandma used to have to walk over to the main road, I think, to pick the mail up. So there was a hell of a lot of people afoot back in that day and age. Wasn't anybody had a car. Few of them had a buggy, but well, Granddad Mogan, he bought a Model T, one of those, I forget what they call them there. They had the canvas, everything was canvas except the running gears, I guess. So, and he was scared to death of the damn thing. I think he drove it once or twice and decided he didn't, he'd rather have a team anyway, so he parked the thing in a goddamn old coal shed up there, and I think it sat there for probably 25 or 30 years. And then when we got a little bit bigger, we decided we should get the damn thing running, so we got it running, and before we got to, we cut the back off, put a box on it, and when we got through, it wasn't much of a Model T anymore.
Good for running around, though, I'm sure.
Well, we used it a little, all right, but that would have been worth a lot of money if it had been left in there and taken care of instead of wrecked later.
Did you guys use coal for heat, or?
Well, this place that we were on south of the house about 2.5 miles was a damn coal mine. And so I remember him and the neighbors used to get together in the fall, and they'd go dig coal, and this coal mine was in, there was a pretty good bank, had a pretty good slope to it. So when you started at the bottom, you probably only had maybe 2 or 3 feet of dirt. Well, every time you went back a couple more feet, well, then you got a whole hell of a lot more dirt. So it finally got to the point, I guess it wasn't hardly worth digging. You had to move too much dirt. They had to get a team in Fresno down in there to get rid of the dirt. Yeah, where we were, we hardly ever burned much wood. There wasn't any trees up there in the first place, so there was a coal mine up there at Opheim. There might still even be one up there. And then there was another one in Rock Creek. And I think there used to be maybe 3 or 4 people used to go over there and mine that coal out of that seam years ago. Well, this one old guy, I don't know if that was Davis or Dieter or what his name was. Well, everybody else had left. Well, so he crawled back. They were undermining this thing, and so he goes back in there and was going to take a few more pieces of coal home with it, and the thing fell in and killed him. So
It's a pretty horrible accident.
what's that?
Pretty horrible accident.
Well, I guess people were used to having deaths back in that day and age. There was another old guy up. Well, it was across from Macaulay's and over there on some stuff that we had, and he was working on some old steel wheel tractor. He was working alone, obviously, and he was taking this steel wheel off of this thing, and he had his back to it, and he was pulling this goddamn steel wheel off the thing, and when it come off, well, it fell over backward on him, and he laid there under that thing. I didn't know how long, and he finally died under there. So
Those things are heavy.
well, if you're on your back under them, yeah, and they were made out of steel. I forget what that guy's name was.
Do you remember the old Qualley Cemetery up there by the Qualley place?
Well, I can tell you just exactly where it is, yep. There's Bob Darkman and I, a friend of mine from Helena, stopped out there the last time. And the thing has got a pretty good metal fence around it, and there are some graves in there with some markers on them, so you get some idea about who's buried up there.
Do you remember anyone calling that the Jordan Cooley Cemetery?
Well, I've heard of Jordan. That might have been what they call that. There's no other cemetery up there, and that was Jordan and Cooley that bunch of Norwegians were on. So that was probably what they call it. It could have been called the Qualley one, because Qualley was probably the closest there. That road used to come from Macaulay's, and it was going pretty much right straight north, and then you finally could only go so far. You run into Qualley's fence, and then you had to turn and go toward where Grandma and Grandpa Mogan lived. So that was where that road was. And then later years, when the county put the new road in, then they kind of cut across that one piece of county land that was in there, not county, state land, north of that thing. And anyway, they shortened the road up quite a bit. Well, that was quite an undertaking years ago when they finally decided to build a good road in that north country. And then after they built the thing, then they even put gravel on it. So Christ, those roads when I was a kid, I can remember if it rained, you stayed home. And if you were in town and it rained, you either stayed there until you had to go home. And Christ, sometimes those people would have to go home and they'd get 2 or 3 ranchers at a time. They'd all start out together, and if one got stuck, they always had somebody else to push him out.
Before they built that good road, did people go to Saco more than they went to Hinsdale?
Well, when Dad was freighting wheat from the home place up there, he used to freight to Beaverton. Beaverton was closer than Saco or Hinsdale, either one, so he must have used 4 horses, I guess, on one of those double wagon boxes. And I don't know whether he could make a trip down and back in a day or not. I guess I don't remember, but I can remember that was the way he was getting his wheat to town. Yeah, where Genevieve was, it didn't make a whole lot of difference. Saco and Hinsdale were just about, one was about the same as the other, so. Hinsdale had a lot better road in later years, so that's the way you usually went, so. And before they put the Frenchman Dam in, there wasn't a decent way of getting across Frenchman. There was one crossing there, right there at Valley Town, and it had a real good way of getting in on the west side, or on the east side, and to get up the west side, the thing was pretty much straight up and down. Well, you had to get some of those old farmers around there with a team in Fresno and scrape the mud off of that one side before you get across there, so.
Was there much in Valley Town?
Well, not really. There never was. It was a post office, and this guy, they sold a few grocers there, and that was a pretty well-known place. You go back far enough when these outfits were traveling through the country, they'd be trailing horses or sheep or some goddamn thing, and that's where they'd stop and pick up a few supplies when they went through the country. They'd just stay far enough north where there was grass and just keep on going until they either had to shear the sheep or sell the lambs or whatever. Then they'd hit the railroad, so. Yeah, there's been a whole hell of a lot of changes made that I can remember, so.
It must have been pretty rough living back then.
Well, everybody was in the same boat. You didn't know how bad a shape you were in, so. I don't think anybody actually went hungry back then.
What did you guys eat a lot of? I'm guessing your mom cooked for you?
The what?
What would you eat?
Well, Mother canned a hell of a lot of stuff. She had, of course, you couldn't keep meat over the summer, so she always had canned beef, the biggest share of the time, and then in the summertime, she always raised chicken, so you got used to eating fried chicken, so.
That doesn't sound too bad.
Well, it wasn't. You always had beef in the wintertime. You wait till it got cold enough so when you butchered the meat would freeze.
Were there any pigs in the country?
Well, my granddad Mogan, he was an old hog raiser. The folks, they didn't really get into that. They would, I think they'd get one or two from Grandpa Mogan and fatten up and butcher, but they weren't really into pig business.
I read somewhere that people really got into turkeys for a while.
Well, Mrs. Stuff, which they lived down there north of Bowman's, I think she used to raise quite a few turkeys, and then they claimed when the grasshoppers got bad, she'd take the turkeys out and run through the grain fields, feed the turkeys grasshoppers, and besides that, she kept the goddamn grasshoppers from eating the grain. So
Were most people raising wheat?
well, up until a few years ago, wheat was the cash crop. And that was, for some reason or other, it took them years to get out of the idea of raising wheat for a cash crop. Now they got all of those plus crops, so they're raising a half a dozen other ones now, so. Well, the way wheat is right now, I don't think you can hardly get enough out of the thing to even afford to hard to raise it for what little I've followed the market in a way.
Yeah, there's too much wheat in the bins.
Well, there is, and at least with some of these other crops now, at least they got something else to sell to pay some of their bills in a way.